Welcome to Extracurricular. I'm your co-host, Eddie Geller.
And I'm your other co-host, Stephanie Vanos, school board member for Orange County Public Schools, here unofficially.
Great job. Nailed it.
Thanks.
No notes. If you're here listening to this podcast for the first time, or maybe you've listened a couple of times, but you are not subscribed, I do ask you kindly, I implore you, I beg of you, please do consider subscribing, rating us on iTunes. Steph, what can they rate us?
5 stars only.
5 stars only. And follow us on Instagram, extracurricular_podcast. And I'm going to clear my throat.
That was quite theatrical.
Thank you. I have taken a lot of improv classes and maybe 1 or 2 scene study classes. So I feel like I'm capable of being theatrical.
Are they role-playing classes?
All right. Role-playing, acting, improv. Acting and improv are not exactly the same thing, but role-playing and improv are the same thing.
Okay.
All right. Anyway, welcome to the show today. We have a wonderful guest, an old friend of mine, Parker Molloy. Parker is a writer about media issues. Sharp as a whip, Parker is. I met Parker during my Upworthy days, and Parker got her start writing about trans issues in newspapers like the New York Times, essentially. And she talks about this in our interview, but seeing about how trans folks were being written about and realizing that she could do it better, and really got off on her career, and now has this great Substack called The Present Age, and just really enjoyed talking to Parker about the media, what's going on, about trans issues these days. Spoiler, things are not good for trans folks in America, but I really appreciated Parker coming on, sharing her insights and her, dare I say, lived experience.
It was a great conversation. I love just the knowledge and experience she brought, and also the personal stories that she shared, I think were really powerful.
Oh, absolutely. So please do stick around for our conversation with Parker. It's really good. I also do want to mention, and we talk about it a little bit briefly in the interview, is we started another war this weekend, a war in Iran, which is heartbreaking because there's already been lives lost, and going to war is the most serious thing a nation can do. And yet again, it has happened unilaterally. And it reminds me of our conversation we had on this very podcast with Jose Gamboa, in which we talked about the ousting of Maduro in Venezuela. Yet again, we have a terrible regime who the citizens of that country deserve justice, and they deserve freedom and equality and democracy. And it is complicated because these leaders who are terrible have been ousted, but we are again losing our democratic powers in this country when the body that is supposed to have the say over whether or not we go to war is Congress, and Congress has decided they don't really care about doing their job. And I just want to acknowledge it because it is very upsetting, and we're back here again.
Well, do you think it's all members of Congress who don't care about not doing their job?
Well, the majority, the Republican majority in Congress, does not feel like it is their job to exercise their Article 1 duties. And obviously there's a slim majority, meaning there's a minority that do largely want to do their job, but it's very upsetting. And I know that's not typically the topic of this podcast, but I felt like I had to talk about it.
Well said. Interesting to see why any branch of government would be willing to cede their power.
Yeah, I mean,
and very concerning because our democracy is our whole government in America is set up on sort of these 3 branches of government, and when you start to see 1 or 2 sometimes cave and give up some of their power for another branch, it's deeply, deeply concerning.
It is incredibly concerning. But you know who does never give away her power? Stephanie Vanos, school board member, here unofficially.
Unofficially today and always.
Unofficially today and always. Let's go to something a little bit more nourishing. which is this week. You did a panel for Equality Florida. Can you let folks know who Equality Florida is and just talk a little bit about your panel?
So Equality Florida is a organization, obviously based here in Florida, and it's really focused on securing full equality for the LGBTQ community. And they do this through lobbying, through grassroots organizing, through education, coalition building. And they're just a group that, again, really focused on LGBTQ issues, but also I think to some broader issues that are, impacting that community and other marginalized communities, and really at this point, impacting all of us. Mm-hmm. So on the panel, we actually talked a lot about some of the anti-First Amendment policies and rules and laws that have that we've seen this year, and really their impact on our teachers and our students, and really our school districts. So yeah, it was a great conversation. I was so thankful to be on the panel with also a school board member, Thomas Vu from Alachua County, Rebecca Thompson from Broward County,
former guest of the pod,
and Caprice Edmonds from Pinellas County. Also, Orange County Superintendent Maria Vasquez opened up the All Together Now conference.
She has not been on the pod.
She has not been on the pod. Maybe one day she will be.
Okay. Do you think she's afraid for us to hold her accountable on the pod?
I don't know. That sounded quite aggressive, actually.
I want answers.
I was just coming to say I thought she did a fantastic job with her opening remarks for the conference. There was also a student panel that I was able to listen while we were having lunch. And the students, I would just say, if I could summarize what they were saying, really, and this was students part of the LGBTQ plus community, and they really said what they're looking for is just a place to feel safe. They're not looking to like be on the streets, like they're protesting this or that. They're looking to feel safe in their classrooms, which is such a basic foundational desire and need. And then they said how even just walking in a classroom and seeing a rainbow somewhere, just seeing everyone is welcome here, for them just makes them feel okay. This is a safe place to be, which I found really powerful.
Well, aren't we also in the same time in which things like rainbows in classrooms are being cracked down on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there was a whole rash of laws, and I will say it's something Equality Florida has worked really hard to clarify the law. What does exactly the law say, and how can we make sure that we are supporting all of our students in the way that they need to be supported while still following the law? And thank goodness, I'm really appreciative of the work that Equality Florida did. One other point that the students brought up, though, was, and we talked a lot about this on the panel, just sort of the impact, the chilling effect that some of these laws have had in our schools. And the students, brought up that in some cases, they're, don't have GSAs, Gay Straight Alliance. It's an after-school club in many of our schools, that some of them don't exist anymore because they can't find a teacher who is willing to support it. Like, not because the teacher doesn't want to support the group, but because they're afraid that by supporting the group, they are putting themselves out there to be attacked in the future. And so I think it really, again, speaks to something we talked a lot about at the panel, was just like the chilling effect. There's the law, and then there's people being afraid, and also just, I would say, some bullying behavior in our state that also makes people afraid of what they're doing in this area.
Well, I know who some of the bullies are, but they won't come on the podcast. Speaking of people who won't come on the podcast. Anything else on your mind, Steph, before we get to our interview?
Well, I actually wanted to ask you if you have done anything new this week.
Well, thank you for asking. It's so sweet. When you take an interest in my life, it means a lot. And I don't say that enough, so I just want to say that on mic, that it's lovely when you take an interest. So thank you.
Well, you make me sound like I don't take an interest.
No, you do. I do.
Backtrack.
Okay. Enough of that. No, I actually started taking drum lessons this week.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Have you ever played drums before?
I've never played drums. I played it on Guitar Hero / Rock Band, which was a lot of fun. And, I'm in my early 40s now, and I'm like, why not? What's holding me back? Maybe it's my time to be a drummer in a band. And so, this is step one, banging the drum. How was listening to me practice my drums day one?
It was a lot of like tap, 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 tap. But you know what? This is what I love. I want to uplift these stories anytime we can, is that we are never too old to try new things, and it's never too late to try new things. And we can always change our story. Always, 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 always. And so anytime I see someone, an adult, decide I'm going to try something new, I love it. And I think we need to normalize that. We should all be doing that. We can be the, athletes we never were before. We can be the musicians we never were before. We can be we can make a career jump because it's something that we've wanted to do and something we'd be good at. And you know what? Who knows yourself better than you when you're in your 40s? I feel like, Oh
my God, that was beautiful. I love it. We can't, there's nothing more we can say. That was incredible. All right. Enjoy our interview with Parker Molloy. Parker Molloy, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. It is excellent to be here.
This feels like an old catch up seeing you on video. I think the last time we talked is when I was running for office. But these are these are both better times and worse times. But we'll get into it. So grateful to have you today, Parker. I was hoping maybe you could just start off by kind of giving us a bit of your background in journalism and media and the kind of stuff that you're working on now.
Sure. So a little bit of background on me. I have always been weirdly interested in the news to the point where, like, when I was a little kid, we didn't have cable. So it was all network TV for me. But I would wake up and I would go downstairs and I would turn on the TV and I would watch the NBC5 Chicago news. And then after it, because the local news is like half an hour, but they play it for like 2 hours in the morning or whatever. Then I would switch over and watch the ABC 7 news, then WGN 9, then Fox 32. Fox 32, they had it. That was like the first not straight news broadcast, but like a morning show. It was called Fox Thing in the Morning, and so I would do that, and then my parents would come downstairs, and I'd be like, "So, Mom, there's there's traffic on the Eisenhower, and yesterday Greg Maddux threw a complete game and with 98 pitches, and like all this stuff, and they're just exhausted, my parents, and they eventually were like, "You have to stay in bed until until like 6 a.m. You cannot get up at 4:30 and watch the news." And I didn't even know how to tell time at that point, so they were like, when it says 6:00 on your clock. And so I was always very interested in just the gathering of information and how it's presented. And then as I got older, we subscribed to the Chicago Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times and the Daily Herald, which is our kind of more local Southwest Chicago suburbs paper, and even I lived in a tiny town called Manhattan. It was the Manhattan American. It was the flimsiest, tiniest newspaper, and it would just have little local stories about the schools and stuff like that, which, now looking back on it, the thickness of that paper is what an actual newspaper looks like today, because they've all gotten so thin.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how I got interested in news, and just understanding what's going on in the world around me. And after that, I went to college, tried to be a music performance major.
What was
3 semesters.
What was your instrument?
Yeah, classical and jazz guitar.
Oh, very cool.
So I could still play, but it was one of those things where about two semesters in, I was talking to my main guitar teacher, and I'm like, what kind of careers can I look at? It wasn't something that occurred to me before applying to school, and the options were cruise ships. Cruise ships are always looking for guitarists to play, and or you can go my route and become a teacher at a college and teach other people to do. And I was just like, so that's kind of it. He's like, yeah, or if you start a band and get real big, it was one of those things where it was like, oh no,
Yeah.
I've gotten myself into quite a predicament here.
Well, it's funny, just real quick. One of the things I realized, like you saying that, is I got an English degree, but spent all my time doing improv comedy. And one of the only ways to make money doing improv comedy is cruise ships. It's like cruise ships, or you get on SNL.
Yeah, which the funny thing is, so my brother, he went to school and got a degree in musical theater, and like the most stable job he ever had was being on a Disney cruise, like playing like Peter Pan and stuff like that. So, more power to the people who do that.
Absolutely.
But I switched to music business. I was interested in music business, talent management. So then I get I go through that, and it's basically kind of tangentially related. And one of the things that I was most interested in all of this was like writing and promotion and things like that. So those skills ended up helping me. Eventually, I start after getting out of college, I do some freelance writing. I wrote around the time I came out as God, this seems like such a weird segue. Around the time I came out as transgender, which was in 2012, I started pitching articles to various news outlets because I didn't like how these outlets were writing about trans people. There would be like a story about it'd be something horrific, like a trans woman found murdered, and like you would read the news article and they'd be like, an oddly dressed man was found in a lake, and it's like, oh, this seems disrespectful. I wonder if people could do this a little better. And so I started pitching stories to Salon and Rolling Stone, and I had a piece or two in the New York Times, like stuff like that. And I didn't have like a journalism background or anything. So after that, finally, a man named Adam Mordecai reached out to me, and he was like, would you like to work at Upworthy? And I was like, the clickbait site? Like, we're trying not to be like that, but yeah. So that's, then that's where we met.
Right.
I was at Upworthy until 2017, when they just like kind of laid off like virtually everyone. And then I went to work at Media Matters, which is this left-leaning media watchdog group. It was basically my dream job because it involved watching a lot of conservative media, and then writing about it and writing about the problems with it and how they can kind of talk the public into taking certain positions on certain issues. And, growing up in the, as someone who was in high school when like 9/11 happened, and like all the media stuff that happened in the aftermath of 9/11 that ended up leading us into war in Iraq, like it was so up my alley when it came to like getting a job at Media Matters, because I was like, yeah, this is the same media that like lied to the country and convinced them that we have, we should go to war. And I wanted to defend against that and write about stuff like that. So I ended up leaving Media Matters in 2021 after my goal was to make it through the 2020 election. Trump was defeated. I thought, good, he's gone. Everything will be better.
Never have to think about him again.
I can move on to something new and different. So I started my own media newsletter called The Present Age, where I still write about media and still write about politics, but I'll also write about like sports if I want to, or anything else. But it wasn't like I wasn't boxed into like, oh, okay, I have to watch 5 hours of Fox News and then the Glenn Beck show and listen to Rush Limbaugh and watch Tucker Carlson. Like, it's always so funny to me when people will be like, people on the left need to get out of their bubbles, and like you can't be afraid to hear like opposing views. And I would always just be like, I hear nothing except opposing views, you know. That's seen in Joker, where he's just like, I have nothing but dark thoughts or something like that. It's like that's me, but whenever I'm confronted with getting out of my bubble, it's like I'm at this point I barely hear anything I agree with.
Yeah.
So I've just been doing that for the past, like, God, we're coming up on 5 years. It's gonna be 5 years in June of making a living with a newsletter, which is kind of crazy.
That's amazing.
I feel like mostly I think I got in at the right time.
Yeah.
And because now it's like every week there's 30 more awesome journalists lost their job, and they're all like, maybe I'll start a Substack, and it's like, it's just crowded.
Yeah.
It's difficult. And luckily also the type of writing I do, which combines reporting and opinion, it's, I guess analysis would be kind of the newsy way of putting it, is something that works for that format. Like lots of like deep investigative journalism that takes months or longer, like it's just not something you can do, with that sort of platform, because there's this expectation that you're going to put out multiple things per week. And like, there are people who do a very good job of like that sort of stuff and have been, kind of scraping by. But for the most part, it's like these newsletters, the people who are successful on it are just like firing off hot takes here and there. And so I try to bridge the gap. You get kind of a hot take, but you also get like, I am going to flood you with like 15 different links embedded in a piece to give you all the sources that I'm talking about, and not just being like, trust me.
I remember I briefly had a blog on Huffington Post. This is like back in the day, connected to some internet activism. And I remember like, I was just obsessed with posting links. And I remember like my first blog, I posted a link like every third paragraph, and like looking back, like I could have chilled out a little bit, but it's a great instinct to be like, this is where my source is and this is where it comes from.
Yeah. It's I always err on the side of like putting too much information in something, which the downside of doing my own thing is that I don't have an editor. Unless there's like something really big that I'm working on, like then I'll like reach out to someone who like to do some like freelance editing for me. But for the most part, if I'm writing my own thing, you're just kind of get it. Like I finish writing and I send it out 10 minutes later.
That's impressive. Just wanted to go back a little bit to your background. First of all, I just want to say I felt so comforted when we were talking about the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times. I grew up in a house where, my dad was like hardcore Tribune. My mom was like hardcore, Chicago Sun-Times. So we had to have both. And then we also had our local The Doings, with like the local going out of my suburb. But I'm kind of curious, the time that you spent, listening to more conservative media, did that background, has that helped you in the work you're doing now in terms of like investigating and digging down and sort of like knowing how to connect the dots? Has that, like, did that background help you?
Yeah, I think so, because, it's one of those things where it's like, you have to understand what's actually happening. So you have to like be able to read something, even though you know that there will be distortions, misrepresentations, what have you, in what you're consuming. But then figure out, like, you have to understand like where they're wrong and what is the, what are they trying to do by framing something a certain way. And it's not always evil,
Right.
It's like a lot of times it's just like, it's how people see the world, and people do see the world in different ways and react to different things differently. And I think like my biggest push is that I always want people to, be critical of what they consume. And when someone's like, well, what source should I look to? It's like, the answer is several. You should trust several sources. You should see how the Associated Press is talking about something, and you should see how NPR is talking about it, and then also see how Fox News is talking about something, just because all of this will give you a more complete picture of what's going on. And I think that a lot of that goes back to me as a little kid reading all the newspapers and watching all the TV news, and just seeing how I can take all of these different sources and kind of piece together what's going on in the world. Because I think the instinct a lot of time when someone's like, well, you can't trust what you read, at this outlet or that outlet, and it's like the instinct is to be like, be a conspiracy theorist, like assume that they're lying to you and they have some evil strategy. And I think a lot of the times it's just like people have biases built in, to who they are and how they see things. And I think that, the best thing people can do is to consume a lot of media, which, as the I consume a lot of media person, like that's easy for me. It comes naturally.
All right, so I'm going to switch things up in the order I was going to talk about, because this is too perfect a transition. Because as you're talking about taking in a lot of sources, we are 24 hours after a war in Iran has started. As the Epstein story continues, our further push into fascism, tariffs overturned, and then reinstituted, ICE kidnappings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I literally have this feeling of like, too much news. Please, someone stop it. And this is not all the Trump administration, but it is part of a strategy and something you've written about. And so I was wondering if you could talk a bit about this idea of flooding the zone, and that part of this overwhelming amount of news is actually part of strategy. And I know some folks are familiar with it, but for folks who are not, love to hear you talk about like what that is and where that comes from.
Yeah, there's a there is a lot of stuff going on, and it's difficult to keep up with it. And if you look at, if I pull up CNN.com right now, I'm sure there'll be something about the war, but there will be 5 or 6 other stories, as you were talking, that are equally as entitled to front page 5-alarm coverage,
right.
But only one thing can take that spot. And the idea of flooding the zone it goes back to Steve Bannon,
our dear friend and Epstein pal. Steve Bannon.
Friend of the podcast.
Whoa. No, not untrue.
Friend of Gavin Newsom's podcast.
There you go. We'll get to him.
But so, so in a 2018 interview, Steve Bannon said this quote is, "The real opposition is the media," when it comes to getting the Trump agenda through. And he says the opposition party is the media, and the media can only, because they're dumb and they're lazy, they can only focus on one thing at a time. All we have to do is flood the zone. Every day we hit them with 3 things. They'll bite on one and we'll get all our stuff done. Bang, bang, bang. These guys will never be able to recover. We've got to start with muzzle velocity. And like that. And then there's a shorter version of it where he says, the real opposition is the media, and the way to deal with them is to flood the zone with shit. So, it's like either way you look at it. But the idea is, if you generate so many stories, scandals, executive orders, provocations, and crises simultaneously, the press can't adequately cover any single one of them. The public can't track what's happening. And it's not about winning any individual news cycle. Because remember, it used to be where like something would happen and then you would talk about it for several days. Right. It's when you reached out to me to talk about this, the war, we had not yet struck Iran, like that wasn't even on the table. That was just kind of floating in the background. Yeah. In fact, during the State of the Union, Trump had said he took care of Iran like last June. Like it was in there.
Like we're
and
done
then
and
just
dusted.
days later, he's like,
Right.
JK. So basically, the goal here is to overwhelm the system's capacity to process information so that nothing sticks.
Yeah.
Nothing gets sustained scrutiny it deserves, and people eventually just tune out. And a lot of people, they don't have the time, energy, or desire to be plugged in all the time and know everything that's going on. And a lot of times, like, I am pretty much all I do is consume media, whether I'm scrolling on social media or I'm reading, newspapers or watching it on TV. And there will be sometimes a story will come up and I'll be like, what? What?
Yeah.
Like I didn't even know this was happening. But what we're kind of seeing, which was kind of there's this recent piece I wrote for Dame Magazine that was about this idea of omni-crisis, of where like we are constantly in crisis. Everything is on fire. And it makes it really difficult to keep up with it. And so one of the things that sort of, happens, the example I pulled up was because in this piece, you could do this with literally any week, but I picked the week of January 11th to 18th. Mm-hmm. And because it was the immediate aftermath of an ICE agent shooting and killing Renee Good. There were protests going onward. You had federal agents deploying tear gas in residential neighborhoods. You had judges issuing orders about ICE. The Pentagon ordered 1,500 soldiers to prepare for deployment to Minnesota. And then you also had the Navy moving a carrier strike group towards Iran. And then you also had Trump threatening tariffs on our NATO allies who'd sent troops to Greenland because Trump wanted to take over Greenland. And then in the background, we had just kidnapped the president of Venezuela.
It's unreal.
Trump was pressuring Exxon to participate in his oil industry overhaul. Negotiations over a looming government shutdown were happening. And just for fun, Trump renamed the road to Mar-a-Lago after himself.
Oh, I missed that one.
Why not? Yeah, see? There's always something. So, any of those, I could imagine there being a point in time where Trump renaming a road after himself would have been a story that people talked about and were interested in. But now it's so far back on the back burner. It is so low priority that people are just whatever, I don't care. And, it's a problem that I feel like news outlets aren't equipped to handle, because all of these things are separate stories, but at the same time, they're connected in a lot of ways. And I try to highlight when I think someone does a good job of this. And so Foreign Policy Magazine was one of the few outlets that tried to kind of give this fuller picture, noting, they said that Trump had repeatedly exhibited a willingness to use the military anywhere and everywhere, but had hamstrung himself by, if you threaten to invade a bunch of countries and also send the military to Minnesota and also, all this, it's kind of one of those things where, he can't do all these things at once. But then, when you look at how it's covered on other sites, you look at CNN has a live blog every day, and the January 16th live blog listed the day's developments as DOJ investigation, curbs on ICE, tensions over Greenland. Those three stories are three separate stories, and everything in these stories was accurate, but no one connected them all. These are all kind of connected, and that's what the format does. It takes the tools of American journalism, headline, push alert, live blog update, nightly broadcast segment, and they're built to tell you what happened today. They're very bad at telling you what's happening and the longer story that each day's news belongs to. And that, I think, is kind of the the challenge to people who run newsrooms to figure out how to do a better job of this. If the goal is to actually inform the public, to figure out how to help the public connect the dots on all these different stories, to understand them all as part of as part of a bigger story that connects.
Yeah.
And it's extra frustrating when there's also this ongoing right-wing takeover of media that's kind of happening now.
Yes.
You just saw CBS got taken over by Paramount, which is run by the Ellisons, and then they put Barry Weiss in charge of CBS News, and now Paramount is probably going to take over WB, which would include CNN. And then, so that would also move to the right. And then you've got Fox News and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Post, which are the realm of the Murdochs.
Right.
And, and everyone else is getting threatened constantly by Trump's FCC to be more patriotic and balanced. And like, they're afraid of stepping out of line. And a lot of them are kind of caving, And so there's this real question. It's like, okay, so here's this problem that newsrooms need to figure out how to fix. And then you look at the people who are in control of the newsrooms and running the newsrooms, and it's just like, oh no, I don't know if they want to fix this problem, which is its own separate issue. And that's kind of one of those things where it's like, I don't know if there's anything I can do other than to say, like, it's a problem. Hey, someone with a lot of money should do something about this, Oh, and I didn't even mention that the Los Angeles Times moved way to the right around the election, and the Washington Post just shifted way to the right. And you now have like their opinion pages are now straight up a conservative opinion page. That's what Mark Thiessen, one of their columnists, said. He's like, we're a conservative opinion page now. And one of the dangers with that kind of ongoing right-wing takeover is that the Washington Post, CBS News, like, these are outlets that people trust, that your average person trusts, and probably isn't aware of the what's going on here and there. Like, I'll still see posts from people who will put like a Washington Post editorial board thing on social media and be like, even the liberal Washington Post thinks that we need to execute homeless people. Like, it'll be something like that. And it'll be like, guys, like, they're wearing the Washington Post as a costume, It's using the brand and the reputation of these brands that has been built up for decades to advance policies that fit their end goals. Like, people will be like, well, the Washington Post is losing money. I mean, yeah, it is. I don't think Jeff Bezos cares.
Yeah.
If you look at, like I saw something, and I can't remember the exact figure, but like his net worth over the time that he's owned the Washington Post has like gone up like tenfold or something like that. Something ridiculous. And oh no, he's losing like a few tens of millions of dollars on the Washington Post every year. Yeah, that's an investment well spent. It's what Elon Musk did with taking over Twitter. People were like, what a foolish business decision. He's richer than ever. He doesn't need Twitter to be profitable. He just it's a propaganda outlet for him. So like that's really kind of interesting to me, and also kind of terrifying, because these problems are only getting worse.
Yeah.
And one example that I can think of, where I first started to kind of see what felt like a coordinated attempt by some conservative politicians to twist things in their favor, was during COVID, when like at the beginning of COVID, so March, April, May 2020, you had all of this COVID related stuff happening. But at the same time, that's also the start of when states started getting weirdly interested in micromanaging whether trans people could play sports in like high schools and grade schools. So like schools were closed at the time. No one was playing sports at the time, but they would like these state legislatures would meet and they'd be like, we need to pass this emergency bill. Again, no sports were being played. An emergency bill that has to go through right away to ban trans people from sports. And like, because all the COVID stuff was happening, it kind of flew under the radar. Like, I was aware of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is kind of a weird priority to have right now, you know? And part of the reason that I think that they use that opportunity to start pushing that legislation is like, there was a lot of stuff that various states could do to help people during COVID, but they just didn't really want to.
Right.
And so they needed more things. They needed more things to work on. And they were like, let's just get some of our weird right-wing policies off the ground. And so that's kind of how that started.
I do want to go back to, you talking about, writing as a trans person and to say we can do a better job. Do you think that is happening? Do you think there is better writing on trans issues these days?
So, in a certain sense, yes. One of my main issues was way back then. One of the big stories was it was after Chelsea Manning had just come out as trans after her trial. Mm-hmm. So she was, and all the news outlets were using her old name and almost none of them using her new name. Mm-hmm. And because she was involved with the WikiLeaks stuff with all the documents and et cetera. There was a lot of resistance. Like even like weeks later, it wasn't like the day of they were, like anyone expected them to update what they referred to her as. But even like weeks later, months later, you would have places calling her by her old name mm-hmm. and not using her name Chelsea. And that is not something that's something that got fixed, I think, because of her story. And because of kind of some pushback from groups like GLAAD, which is like a media advocacy group for LGBTQ issues, like CNN, I remember at the time, their excuse was they were like, we need to refer to people by their legal name, and we have no evidence that this person has updated their legal name. And it's just like, oh yeah. How many stories have you done on Lady Gaga? Like it's one of those things where it's like you're not like Stephanie Germanotta. Like no, right. You call her Lady Gaga, and that's her name. Like at the time Larry King was on CNN. It's like that wasn't his legal name, and it's one of those things where it's like, we all understand that you can't have these hard and fast rules and then you make exceptions only for certain people. So it got more common for news outlets to refer to trans people by the name and the pronouns that they choose, that they want to go by. And I think that that's a good thing. And you started to see, the Associated Press style book, style guide, like that was a big one that got updated because it was always so tricky to like figure out, places would try to come up with rules where they're like, well, what if we make it a requirement where it's like we will refer to a trans person if they have a surgery by this pronoun. It's like, okay, but then you're expecting trans people to be like, hello, I have had this list of medical procedures. That is how you can refer to me. Like, no, you need to just be able to like know how to talk about someone without getting their most personal details.
Yeah.
Right.
So in that sense, I think it's improved a lot.
Yeah.
However.
Big however.
big however coming up. So we got the basics down. We got the basics down, and for a few years there were outlets that were willing to publish pro-trans pieces. And Time magazine, I think it was in 2015, declared we'd reached a trans tipping point, a transgender tipping point. That was the big magazine cover with Laverne Cox on it, which is really funny to me, that their example of like, we've reached the society's tipping point because a Netflix TV show had a recurring character who happened to be trans.
Right.
Like and that's before Netflix TV shows were like a big thing. It's
Right.
like no one was watching, very few people were watching these shows. And they were like, clearly society is ready for this. And there was a lot of backlash to it. And then you had Caitlyn Jenner come out, and Caitlyn Jenner is so fucking weird.
Yeah.
And generally evil.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's like, she did not help anyone with anything. And there was this idea that trans people were so fully accepted by society, and if anything, maybe trans people are getting treatment that's too good compared to everyone else. Like that was kind of the media idea that started to form around 2015, 2016, 2017. And like, but before that, like, I pitched a story to the New York Times about how it should be illegal to deny trans people health insurance. That was like, that's what trans people actually care about. Things like, hey, I don't think you should be able to discriminate against me. Like, I think that the same non-discrimination, laws that apply to anyone else, on the basis of race or religion or, anything, like those should also apply, here. You shouldn't be able to just fire someone for being trans or turn them away, like something like that. And there'd be newspapers that would like publish stuff like that. But then there was this weird moment. I can't remember exactly what year it was or what I was trying to pitch, but this editor that I'd worked with at the New York Times responded to something I wrote saying, we've already run a pro-trans piece recently.
Oh my God.
And he linked me to a piece that was written like 13 months earlier. And I'm like, okay. And that's when I started to feel like, what's going on here? Like, I think that for a while there was this novelty, like, we should have pro-trans piece because it goes against the cultural grain,
It's
like that was kind of the
transgressive.
idea.
No pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. And then it kind of got to the point where they were like, well, trans people are so accepted now. Like, we could run some anti-trans things. We could kind of start.
We need some balance.
And yeah, like, and there would be like pieces that would, that were like, Caitlyn Jenner makes a mockery of womanhood and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I mean, I think that's on account of her being a Kardashian more than on her being trans. But, as far as like, how she presents herself to the world, it's like, that's not your average trans person. And basically you had, these bigger outlets kind of starting to beat up on trans people with anti-trans op-eds. And of course, around that time also, in 2015, after the Supreme Court's marriage equality ruling, a lot of the anti-marriage like groups had to kind of regroup and find a different target, an easier target. And so they started focusing on trans people and fighting against trans rights because they still needed to raise money and keep their political influence going. And we kind of just got to this point where they had this well-funded lobbying effort, when it came to trying to get laws passed to restrict trans rights, to trying to influence how the news covers trans people. Like, before that, it was mostly, that people just didn't know and didn't care, and there wasn't much attention to it. And it's like trans people never asked for the transgender tipping point.
Right.
Never asked for Caitlyn Jenner to get like a big ABC News special to come out as trans. Like these are not things that anyone really sought. But I think that they created a lot of like resentment among people who oppose trans people being in society, you know? And it kind of built out from there. So then you started to have these, you know, these journalists who were just like weirdly interested in like, well, wait, so you're telling me that some trans teens are getting hormone replacement therapy? That can't be good. Like, we're gonna like dig into that. And so all these things that had been happening, you know, trans teens getting healthcare, and trans kids playing sports with their friends and stuff like that. Like all that stuff had been happening. Same thing with, you know, when we're talking about sports, especially, there were a lot of things that were like, oh, yeah, well, what should we do when it comes to college athletes? Like, what should the rules be? And the NCAA was like, we'll look at the data and we'll come up with what we think is fair as far as rules go. And pretty much everyone was like, cool. If you don't meet the criteria, you don't compete. That's fair. And, you know, same thing with like professional sports leagues. Like, they set their own rules. If they want to completely ban trans people, they can do that. If they wanted to, you know, say you have to be on hormones for a certain number of years before you can compete, cool. And it all seemed to kind of work, because like since the year 2000, like trans women were allowed to compete in the Olympics, because the Olympics set up their own rules. And there were a grand total of 0 trans women who won medals. There was a total of 1 trans woman who qualified for any Olympic event. And it was for, I forgot what, New Zealand maybe. She was a weightlifter, and she came in dead last. She disqualified herself on the first thing. You know, like, because in like some countries, getting on the Olympic team isn't super hard. Like, I think that in the US, like, we look at this, we're like, oh, these are the best of the best of the best. It's like some other countries, it's like, that's who showed up. You know, it's how you had that break dancer from Australia or whatever, right? You know, so it's like, but still, you know, it's like the system was working. And then like these anti-trans people come along, and what they do is they take these arguments, they create arguments that trans people aren't making. They're like, oh, so LeBron James should be allowed to say, I'm a woman, and then dominate the WNBA. It's like, no, first off, there is no universe in which he would be incentivized to do this. Right. You know, like,
let me get paid WNBA 1/100th or whatever.
Yeah, they get paid so little that remember when Brittany Griner had to go over to Russia to play, like, because she needed extra money, and then she got arrested, like, was held as a political prisoner over there for like a year. It's like that's the reality for WNBA players. Like, they're just scraping by. Like, you don't have to worry about LeBron coming in and just dominating just because you saw the movie Joanna Man. Like, you know, it's
incredible reference.
This, you know, I've got that. I've got I used to always say that people, you know, be like, oh, you think this is the plot of the movie Ladybugs? Remember that one?
Oh yeah,
Rodney Dangerfield. Yeah, about a boy playing on the girls' soccer team.
Incredible.
You know, yeah. So, you know, like, it was always these things where like that became the new thing, where people in newspapers would start to argue like, oh, trans people think that kids at the age of 4 should be, you know, given surgery and stuff like that. It's like, no one's saying that. No one at all, you know, or think there shouldn't be any like counseling or any like tests to make sure someone's actually trans before they, you know, go through a medical transition. It's just like, no, it's actually a gigantic pain in the ass to be a trans person.
Only imagine, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And
it's like, oh, go ahead.
no, I was just saying, I mean, even, in the school context, like as if there's all of these high school boys that are just going to, become girls so that they can compete on a track team. I mean, it's just like not happening. I don't know where this is coming from.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's one of those things where it's like the funny thing. So the story I always like to go back to when talking about trans people in sports is several years back, there was this wrestler. He was a trans boy. His name was Mac Beggs, which cool name, Mac Beggs. All he wanted to wrestle on the boys team. He was like, I'll wrestle on the boys team. I think I can do it. It should be fine. But he lived in Texas, and Texas was like the first state with a rule that said like, no, you have to compete on whatever has like your birth certificate says originally. And so he was given this choice where it's just like, okay, so you can not wrestle, or you can wrestle against girls. And he was like, I guess I'm gonna wrestle against girls. And so he went off testosterone, but he had been on it like before that. So like he had like, he had an advantage in this case because he had recently been on testosterone, but while he was competing, he went off of it, which no one should have to choose between whether to continue getting healthcare or whether they can play a high school sport.
Yep.
You would think that goes without saying, but so anyway, he goes and he competes against the girls and he just dominates. Like he's just, it's just ridiculous. He's so good. And he wins the state championship in the girls division, but he gets booed. Everyone's booing and they're mad and they're like, this is unfair. That's clearly a boy. He shouldn't be participating in this. And so afterwards, after that season, there was like this hope, like, cool, state of Texas, they're going to see how unbelievably unfair this was. And they're going to let him compete against boys next year, right? Wrong. They said, no, you will, like, these are the rules and you're going to keep to it. And then they, like, all they did was they made the rule around, like, how the testosterone, how long he had to be off testosterone or something like that.
Oh my God.
And so the next year he goes back, like, at this point, just almost to kind of prove a point.
Yeah.
And he goes and he wins the state championship again and he gets booed. And there's this really famous picture of him putting like one of his opponents in like he's got like her head in like a chokehold. And the funny / sad thing is that this happened because of an anti-trans rule. Because he was forced to compete against the girls, against his wishes. But people take that picture of him with the girl in like a headlock, and they're like, "This is what Democrats want. They want boys competing against girls," and it's just like, you fools. Oh, it's so frustrating, and it got to the point where there was this website. Oh, I'm trying to remember which one. The Federalist. It's called The Federalist. This conservative website. They wrote up this piece that was all about, like, they're like, this is why we can't have boys playing in girls' sports because it results in this. And his body's natural bone structure and all of this blah, blah, blah is that of a boy. And clearly he can't compete against girls. And then people pointed out, like, hey, you just made you got this completely wrong because you think that he's a trans girl and not a trans boy. And so then they went in and silently revised the article to make the exact opposite argument, being like, well, she is on like, they even went into like then misgender him. Like, they had been calling him he because that's what they thought originally, but so they flipped it. And so fighting against this sort of stuff in the media, because that's where a lot of this gets shaped.
Yeah.
And that's part of why I'm so interested in all of this, is because people's opinions about trans people are almost entirely based on things they see on TV.
Yeah.
Growing up, my understanding of trans people was the Jerry Springer Show and the Maury Show and Ace Ventura: Pet Detective.
Oh my God. Yeah, I remember that. It was the ending is just like played for, like that joke is stuck in my head. And it was like, how gross and disgusting is this? And
exactly.
The villain would do, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Like that was my understanding. And it's just like, oh, this sucks. Like, you know, it sucks to see yourself in you know, movies like that, TV shows like that. But it was how it was at the time, you know? And it shapes how trans people see themselves and how other people see trans people. And I wrote something for Vice years ago, because it's Vice. I have no idea if it's still online.
Right.
But I wrote something for Vice about like the history of trans people in movies. And like the storylines were always like, you have the deceptive trans person who fools people into thinking that they're not trans. And then afterwards you have a character like in Ace Ventura, like the character after he reveals that the character is trans, like it's just him like vomiting. It's like so you've got like that. You've got movies where the trans person is a serial killer. That was a big one. And you know, it's like that was the representation, that was the understanding that people have of trans people, and it contributes to these biases that people have. And it's unfortunate because right now I feel like in media we're starting to see kind of the same thing. You see these right-wing websites will find a trans person who does something truly crazy, and they're like, this is what trans people are like.
Right. It's the same immigrant playbook too. Like, here's the one undocumented person.
Breitbart used to have a black crime vertical on its website, where it was just stories about black people committing crimes. You know, like you could do that with literally any group.
Yeah.
But it's even more effective when it's a group that's so small that people don't know anyone personally in their lives. Like if I made one that was like straight white dude crimes, and it was just straight white dudes doing crime, like I don't think it would have a big effect on how people view straight white dudes, you know, because it's just like people are like, well, my dad isn't like that, you know? But yeah, when it comes to trans people, it's like they find like the craziest stories they can, or, you know, lately the big thing has been accusing literally any mass shooter of being trans.
Oh my God, it's so disgusting.
Super fun to live with. And the thing is, it's like, yeah, there will occasionally be trans people who commit crimes. Like it happens. The question is, do trans people disproportionately commit crimes? And the answer is no. So it's like, so you've got all that, and it really shapes how people view trans people. And as newspapers like the New York Times kind of shy away from, you know, doing pro-trans pieces or give equal balance to pro and anti-trans stuff, you start to see public opinion shift against trans people. And like there was a poll that came out by this newsletter or website called The Argument, that was just like, wow, the backlash to trans rights is pretty intense. And like the takeaway was like, they're like, activists are asking for too much. It's like, no, you fools. Like everyone's just like, the public's turning, like there is nothing that individual trans people can do or trans organizations can do to change public opinion. Like it relies on media. Like, I bet you hadn't heard the story of there was a trans man named Leo Cundiff here in Chicago who last week, or maybe the week before, a woman was standing near like the edge of Lake Michigan, as one does, and a stroller that she had was blown into the lake. And so this dude, he's like a 30-year-old trans guy. He dives into Lake Michigan and he saves this baby, and it's this super heroic story. It's like, cool. I feel like in a just society, like that would be a big story, you know, like, but like on the same level as like, look at this evil trans person, you know, it could be like, well, look at this good trans person. But like in the same way that him being good doesn't mean that all trans people are good. Like someone being bad doesn't mean that either. And, you know, so it's just one of those things where it's a really tricky time. Because there's this rising anti-trans sentiment, and there are a lot of people telling Democrats, oh, you need to talk about this less. And the frustrating thing about that is like, Democrats already, just generally speaking, don't talk about trans people. Usually, right. You know, like Kamala Harris spent $0 on LGBTQ ads. Meanwhile, Republicans spent like $200 million in anti-trans ads before the 2024 election. It's like, yeah, you're not going to win the argument when you're not fighting it. You know, like people would ask her like, hey, do you think trans people should have healthcare? And she'd like mumble and be like, I guess we should follow the law. You know? It's like, that's not quite the reassuring statement that I think anyone wants. But you know, it's like, I understand that that's the advice that's being given, you know, to some people. There's still awesome Democrats. You know, Zoran Mamdani does a great job of communicating his support for trans people. J.B. Pritzker here in Illinois. You know, a few others here and there are really good, but it's few and far between. It's a really weird and difficult time, especially with like states enacting. States are just kind of seeing what they can get away with at this point.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, in Kansas, just last week, Kansas passed a bill and overrode the governor's veto. The governor's a Democrat. Her criticism of the bill was that it was poorly written. Not exactly like not exactly standing up for trans people, right. But at least she vetoed it.
Right.
But it got overridden. And the bill basically says that trans people need to have driver's licenses that list their sex assigned at birth on the driver's license. You can't update it. One of the first things that trans people do upon transitioning is updating like identity documents, because it's embarrassing to go up to someone and be like, here's this here's this document that, you know, outs me as trans to you. And for the most part, it's like everyone was able to kind of do that pretty much everywhere in the country. As far as passports were concerned, you know, trans people just had to have like a doctor saying like this person's undergone, you know, medical treatment for being trans, and they can have an updated, passport. And Kansas was just like, nah.
Yeah.
Not only are we going to block people from updating their driver's licenses and their birth certificates, but we're going to revert them for it. Actually, we're not even going to revert them. We're just going to invalidate your driver's license.
And you have to pay.
If you have changed it.
And you have to pay to get it fixed.
Yeah.
Quote unquote fixed, you know.
Yeah. Quote unquote corrected or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, this bill, like, you're familiar with, you know, how laws, how a bill becomes a law and all that stuff. But, you know, like, this was one of those situations where it was like, it was an existing bill that then they like took all the text out and replaced all the text with this anti-trans thing. So it was something completely different. So they were able to kind of ram it through like in the course of like a day or two.
Yeah.
So there was no real way to build up any opposition to it. And it turns out that like a total of like 300 people have active Kansas driver's licenses that were affected by this. Like, imagine an entire state just being like, screw you, 300 people, like that's what it was. And it makes it makes it really difficult to just kind of live, and like there are all these stories about like people who, there was this woman in Ohio in 2018, the ACLU took up her case. Her name's Stacey Ray. Basically her whole thing was like her birth certificate wasn't updated, and Ohio said like, we won't update your birth certificate. She had an updated driver's license, so she got a job somewhere, and driver's license says female, and everyone there, no clue she's trans, because you can't really, some people are visibly trans, some people are less visibly trans. It varies.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where like things were going fine, but then they had an issue because something came back because her birth certificate didn't match her driver's license, and it caused all sorts of issues, which outed her to her bosses, which then her bosses outed her to everyone else who works there, and then she got harassed, and then she was called a freak, and then even after she left that job, she tried to get another job as like a truck driver or something like that she needed a special license for, and because she had these documents that were mismatched, they were like, she failed a TSA like security check that she needed for the license. It was a whole mess, and it just makes life a lot more difficult. Like anytime you go somewhere where you have to give someone a license, whether it's at a bar or a job or anything like that, if it doesn't match what you look like, you're gonna have a really rough time. You're essentially outing yourself as trans, and the same thing goes for these like laws as it pertains to like public bathroom use and stuff like that, where it's like if a trans woman is forced to use a men's bathroom and she's in a restaurant and then walks into the men's restroom, first off, she's probably like at an increased risk of danger in the restroom. But even if you set aside anything that happens in the restroom, just the act of walking into the men's room outs her as trans to anyone who has like can see the bathroom. So it's one of those things where these laws, part of their function is to put a big spotlight on people for being trans and to make it more difficult to live their lives. And the end result of this isn't about sports, and it's not about, we have to make sure that, kids need to wait till they're 18 or whatever to make medical decisions about themselves. It's not about that, because you had Kevin Roberts, who's the head of the Heritage Foundation. He just recently on a podcast, he said like, yeah, their next goal is to just criminalize all transition related care for people of all ages, because he doesn't believe that trans people exist. And that's kind of that's the official policy of the federal government at the moment.
Yeah.
I renewed as soon as the election was over. I still had several years left on my passport, but I went into the post office and I renewed it because I was like, I bet one of the first things Trump's going to do when he gets in office is to make it impossible for trans people to renew their passports. And that's exactly what happened. So basically now I have to just hope that before 2034, when my passport expires, that there's a Democrat in office who will also reverse these policies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things that I'm like, that I get nervous when there are like Democrats who are kind of cagey about where they stand on trans rights. Mm-hmm. It's like, I wouldn't be angry if like federal policy on trans issues went back to exactly what they were in January 2025. Not perfect, not great, really, really not great, but still like better than the horror landscape that we kind of have right now. And it's kind of weird how much pushback I get from from people who are like, you can't ask that of like, you can't ask someone to implement the crazy progressive policies of Joe Biden and Barack Obama. You know, like it's like I'm not asking for like a big leap forward. I'm just asking for us to like claw back to kind of the lighter hellscape that we were at.
Right.
Well, I think it's so powerful to hear your personal story and to hear the stories that you're sharing today. And, you know, one thing that I've noticed, because that same bill went through the Florida legislature, I think last session or maybe the session before, it wasn't ultimately passed, but it was going to the legislature. And what I find is you'd have students, you'd have people who would come up and talk to legislators or lawmakers to say like, this is actually what, you know, causing, you know, what requiring, you know, trans people to go, you know, change their license and all this. This is what it will do to people. And I heard them, you know, speak to these lawmakers. But there's this resistance from lawmakers, and they will sort of like hear these arguments and they'll say, well, but those people are all part of some activist group. And so therefore we don't have to listen to what they're saying, because it's almost like being part of, you know, like Equality Florida or like some, you know, quote unquote activist group makes what you're saying not valid. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
yes. But even more than that, there's this real tendency of when journalists and politicians refer to trans activists, they really just often mean literally any trans person who has literally spoken a single word about being trans on the internet ever.
Great point.
Or in person. Yeah. You know, it's and that gets used against people. Meanwhile, like there are a handful of like journalists who've made entire careers out of being anti-trans. It's like if you refer to them as anti-trans activists, like they'll get very angry. they'll get very, very upset, and they'll be like, no, I'm a journalist. I'm just seeking the truth. It just happens to be that you don't exist. But yeah, it's really frustrating because like people will say like, people will call me an activist, and I will say I am not an activist. I am, you can call me a writer or a journalist or a pundit, even if you want, you know, like whatever, commentator, I don't care. But like, I'm not an activist. Like the last time I wrote something specifically about trans rights was, I think, in December. And like, it's just one of many topics that I'll kind of cover, but
Right.
I will still get someone like calling me an activist and using that to be like, this person's an activist, so therefore they cannot be trusted. You know, they're pushing an agenda. And it's like, everyone's pushing an agenda. Everyone, when you're talking to, you know, speaking before a state legislature that's talking about taking away your rights, like, yeah, your agenda is like, don't take away my rights, please. That I would appreciate it if you did not. But yeah, that definitely comes up.
Well, usually we like to end the podcast on a more hopeful note, but I am actually glad to put a period on this conversation, because the main reason I reached out to you, I mean, we've known each other for a while, is, you know, this bill in Kansas and everything that's been happening. And I just, you know, really want to put a finer point to our audience, what it is like a year into Trump 2.0. And I love how you articulated the line between how the trans community is portrayed in the media and the free-for-all that these legislators and this administration are able to go at trans folks and what it's like. So thank you. Before we go, where can people find your work? Where can they support you?
The best place to find my work is at my website, which is www.
Great start.
Read READ TPA, as in the present age. Mm-hmm. So readtpa.com. That's my newsletter. I'm also on Blue Sky. You could just kind of search my name on there and I'll pop up. I post way too often. Name again is Parker Molloy, Molloy. And like, you know, yeah, like those are probably the two best places to look for me. to say hi. And yeah, I just, I hope that this has been helpful.
Absolutely.
I didn't get to go into a big foreign policy speech.
We're gonna save it for the next one.
We were gonna. God, wouldn't that have been funny if I come on and you're like, sorry, a war started yesterday. We need to know.
This is what we got to talk about.
There's no such thing as a slow news day anymore. We gotta go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate having you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
That's great.